Hi, everybody. I am the director of the ADAPT Centre, John Gallagher, and I'm delighted to welcome you all today to this event. We're focusing on the intersection of generative AI and the future of teaching and learning. And it's great to see so many of you here this morning to explore the transformative potential of generative AI on education. This is a joint event between ADAPT and the Learnovate Centre, and both of the centres have a strong and rich history grounded in Trinity College Dublin, which reflects our commitment to cutting-edge research and innovation. I think it's noteworthy that our keynote speaker, Professor Vinny Wade, was the founding director of both centres, and I think that showcases our commitment to collaboration and working together. The achievements of both of the centres are quite extraordinary. Learnovate has emerged as Ireland's leading technology centre in the area of future work and education, and ADAPT is recognised as Ireland's premier research centre in AI-driven digital technology. And our collaboration today reflects our joint commitment to driving innovation in a manner that's ethical and human-centric, and also to addressing skills gaps. So I'd like to take this opportunity before I go on to invite you all to attend the ADAPT Advance Conference that will be taking place on the 19th of June in this venue. It will focus on generative AI across a range of domains. And I think that QR code there, you can use that QR code to get more information about the event and also to register. And I would recommend you register as places are limited, but we'd be delighted to see you. I think this morning is going to be a really exciting discussion. I hope you find it enriching, and I hope that the discussions inspire ideas and collaborations that lead to future impacts that are positive for education in Ireland. To begin, we're going to have Professor Vinny Wade. He's going to talk to us about the growing role and impact of generative AI and chatbots on EdTech's digital transformation. Professor Wade has had or made significant research contributions across a range of domains, in particular on web-based personalization and adaptive technologies. And his research interests include knowledge and data-driven AI systems, generative AI, and digital media technologies and their applications in the area of health and education. So Vinny, I'd like to welcome you to the podium, and thank you, everybody.
Delighted to be here today. Delighted to have a chance to talk to you a little bit about generative AI and education technology and just where it's all going. So I've been involved in education technology for about 25 years now. Both as a researcher, as a user, educator in Trinity, I ran all of education technology in Trinity for about 10 years, introduced it within the university. And as a spin-out company, we spun out education technology in simulation about 10 years ago, and that got acquired for about 50 million a couple of years ago. So I'm kind of seeing this from different perspectives. So just in the audience, just if you put up your hands and let me know, are you working with education technology within your company, or is your company one of the education technologists company? Just to get to your kind of roles. How many people here are involved in education or teaching in some way? Okay, as users. And then finally, how many people are just using Gen AI to get their jobs done during the day? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about all three of those and try and look and see where it's going and what's happening. It is the fastest moving area of artificial intelligence across the world. It's also the fastest moving technology across the world. And we're going to talk about why, and we'll talk about where it's going. So, as John said, I'm from the ADAPT Centre, and what differentiates us from a lot of other research centres in AI around the world is what we try and do is be human-centric. What that means is we're actually looking at the technology and how it empowers an individual, rather than us being automated by the technology, which is not just uncomfortable, but actually is not going to be successful in the future, and we'll see why. So today I want to talk about what is generative AI. I'm just aware that if I stand here, you can't see the slides. If I stand here, it's probably better. Is that okay? What is generative AI? Because a lot of people talk about it, and they all talk about what it does, not what it is. I wanted to pull the covers back a little bit. It's not magic, okay? and it's not that difficult to understand either. How is it impacting industry and why? It is the fastest moving technology, so we want to know a little bit about why. If you understand that, you understand how to protect yourself and then how to make use of it. Think of it as a wave coming in, you don't be side on, you want to be able to go over that wave and surf it. And then finally, how does it actually work under the covers? What is it currently, how is it currently being used in education? Is a really hot question at the moment. And again, there's an awful lot of rumor and so forth. I'm going to try and provide some clarity in exactly where it's going and how it's being used. What are the risks and challenges? Generally speaking, if you read an article, you can tell where the author is coming from. Either they'll start with the risks or they'll start with the benefits, but rarely will they give you both. So I'm going to try and get you both within 1.5 hour presentation. And then finally, where is it going? I don't know if people have heard, but like there's new announcements from ChatGPT called Student GPT. There's a new announcement from Google called Gemini Education Spaces. These are happening literally days apart now. So what exactly does that mean for us going forward? And how can we actually then be informed to be able to be doing it the right way? So first of all, what is generative AI? It's part of AI. It's part of machine learning. It's a particular part within deep learning. And right in the bottom, generative AI is using all of those deep learning techniques to do what? Well, what generative AI stands for is generating content. So a lot of the old, and sorry for those in data analytics, but the older people who use the data analytics, it's very much about discovering patterns and discovering. Gen AI is all about actually predicting forward and generating content. That's where its names come from. It will generate text, image, video, speech, conversation. It'll generate data for your data analytics, synthetic data. It will generate it in all different ways. The way I kind of describe it is, think of content now being like liquid and you having a glass. It will take whatever shape your glass is, have whatever taste you want, and be able to satisfy whatever thirst you have. That's what Gen AI is trying to do. Now, there is some problems with that. You want it to be correct. You want it to be truthful. You want to be trustworthy. We'll talk about them as we go forward. It is very eloquent, even when it gets it wrong. It's very convincing, okay? So it will absolutely tell you something that's completely false and give you references that don't exist, okay? But what's happening is, since it's really hit the marketplace in about 2021, 2022, it's actually improved an awful lot on its accuracy. And again, I'm going to show you some of that. And there's a huge range of application types. So any sort of questions and answers, any sort of administrative and marketing communications, any sort of customer and supplier communications, any sort of process knowledge and exchange, any sort of training and staff development, and where it's now moving, any R&D. It will generate suggestions for your products. It will generate suggestions for your compounds if you're doing chemicals. I mean, that's the kind of level it's moving into, okay? The one I always worry about is the new job that people have is called influencers and social media influencers. Think about it, social media influencers, all they do is generate content. Gen AI generates content. Could you imagine social influence with this? So it will actually go into all of these areas and is going into all of these areas. And that's also why companies are kind of feeling a little bit uncomfortable, because every department is being impacted by this. So why is it different? Well, previous automation technologies tended to focus on automating low-level manual processes, whether it be in the factories, whether it be in manufacturing, whether it be at the office level, at routine administration. Generative AI is actually focused on the knowledge worker. It's particularly good involving decision-making and collaboration. And where it's really focused on, it's really about making the knowledge worker more productive, making that knowledge worker be able to make faster decisions, get the right information at the right time in the way they want to use it, and move it forward. So when you think about it, actually, it's operating at a different level in terms of the organization. That means it has much more a chance to have a much broader impact. It will do text generation, speech, text to speech, image to image, text to image. It will do it all for you. The other part that's unusual is that as humans, the only thing we ever talk to are other humans. I mean, we talk to our dog. We don't expect our dog to answer back. Okay, well, not much. Okay, and we might talk to our car, but that really doesn't do much use. But actually, with generative AI, it will talk back to you and it will behave as a human. And our brains are conditioned to be able to, without realizing it, think of it as a human. Even it's called anthropomorphism. And even though we know it's not real, actually we begin to have the expectations that they'll behave somehow as a human might. So we've got to be very careful with that within Gen AI. And we're seeing that some companies are deliberately trying to muddy the waters there. I think it was anyone's looked at the newspaper today, but anyone hear about the problems that's, is it Scarlett Johansson? Yeah, you know, and the synthetic voice that ChatGPT has now come out with sounds very like Scarlett Johansson from Her, the movie. They've apologized and they've just retracted it, but it gives you an idea of just where they're going on this. So why is it different? Well, it's the fastest adopted technology ever in history. To get to 100 million users, it only took 2 months. Compare that to TikTok, which took 9 months, and we're all so over TikTok. It's everywhere, right? So if it's that fast, why and why? Second thing is, humans conduct business and social activities through conversation, and the interfaces are intuitive and efficient. In computer science, we call it frictionless. It means it's so easy to use. If you can speak, if you have a language, you can use Gen AI. And what happens then is you start using it, you realize actually, the more cleverly I use it for my questions, the better it produces the answers for me. So there is no manual. The other part that people may have a false assumption on is that, well, I don't really want to talk to a computer. Actually, when the studies go, they find people actually do prefer, because computers or chatbots, they're available 24/7, so they're there when you need them. They don't judge you. We all have that fear. They don't, if you don't understand it, you can say, I don't know, explain that again, and it doesn't get upset. Okay? So it is endlessly patient, 24/7 available, non-judgmental, and reasonably accurate. So you can see why actually people will begin to use these things much more. And we're seeing it from healthcare in very sensitive areas as well. Okay. So McKinsey did a report in 2023. What are the big areas that Gen AI is actually being used, right? So the big 5 are sales, marketing, software engineering, customer operations, and product R&D. Okay. That's about 70, in 2023, that was about 75% of the use of Gen AI in those spaces. And it was transforming them. The one that people are really surprised about was product R&D. Hang on a second, these things are dumb, aren't they? They just generate language. They can't be creative. Yes, they can. Depends what you mean by creative. It can connect different things together. It can do massive suggestions and move forward and see what they could be. So this thing actually is really, really powerful. What are the areas within organizations? Or the high-tech space is probably the one. If you look at education, it's not anywhere near as impacted by 2023. I always thought that figure was slightly low, because I'm seeing now lots of companies beginning to do this. It took a bit longer to train the systems and to begin to produce product, but it's now appearing. So the education space is now becoming much more competitive for the use of Gen AI. Corporate benefits, what's happening? Well, we're seeing productivity increases, okay? So productivity, depending on who you talk to, will increase between 10% and 30%. That's profit. That's the same people, and you do 30% more work, okay? But another way, Gen AI may not take your job, but someone using Gen AI will, okay? Because they're going to be much more efficient and productive. Don't get scared. You can use it too. But you have to know how to use it and know where to use it and so forth. So, and when there's multiple reports on this productivity. Some of the productivity actually is quite interesting. Some of the productivity is where the user is not very experienced. So it's providing a lot of help that the user wouldn't normally have and get their job done, activity done faster. Other sides where the person is expert, they're just using it to get started. They're just using to, I'll get it to generate and then I'll just fix it. So we're seeing it from both ends of the spectrum, both experienced people and in their jobs, and the newer. Making faster decision making, task completion, making content production faster. In the software engineering area, we're noticing that teams of 8 programmers are now becoming 6, Gen AI being the 7th. Now, what's interesting is they're beginning to cop on that they actually need somebody else in the team now who looks after Gen AI to make sure it's being used the right way. Or if you're a software company, you're not giving away your IP by accidentally giving it your software to Gen AI to fix the mistakes, and then you find that your software is elsewhere in the network. It's making content production much faster. I mean, it's not as if we're not already overloaded with content. Now, so sometimes I kind of go, well, do we really want that? But it is becoming much faster to get out much more high quality content using this approach. And it's lowering the cost of dealing with customers. And that's the other big one. Because what's happening is you're actually interacting with customers in a much more deeper way with these. You're able to service them before they actually land on your call centers or in your employees' desk, on your employees' desks. And the engagement is much more richer because these things can be very polite, can be very helpful, can give the right answers at the right time in the right place. So how does it work? I'm going to be really quick. Everyone's heard this word language model and large language model. How many people actually know what it is? Okay, that's what I guessed. So very, very quickly, large language models are not facts. There is no fact in them. There is no right and wrong. There is no moral judgments. There is nothing like that. All it is at the first stage, it represents every word as a number, but it represents it compared to or close to other numbers. So for example, if I have a CEO and a COO, they're concepts that are quite close. So you can expect them in a language model to be represented by numbers relatively similar or have connections. Now, we have a massive vocabulary. So I like using my arms, but I can't move this. We have a massive vocabulary. So actually, we have lots of numbers representing each word and the connections to them all. That's the first part of a language model. Okay, so we represent them as massive matrices, okay, or vectors if you want. Okay, but that's not what the actual executable is. The executable then is taking all of these bits of text, representing them, and then building an AI or neural network which predicts what the next word would be. Now we think about that, that seems mad. And to be honest with you, as AI people, around about 2020, we thought, this can't work, really? And we saw first working, and we kind of went, it's kind of spuddy, it's kind of awkward, it's not quite right, but actually it's getting closer. What happens is if you have that amount of vocabulary and you're training this network over that vocabulary, trying to predict what word comes next in what context. And in 2018, a new architecture for it called Transformer came in, which not only looked at the word, but also looked at the word in its placing in the sentence and its connections with even with the words in the sentence. It then began to predict really accurately what the next word would be. So that's all the model is. The model is a predictor of your next word. Okay, but it has so much context, so much information about the words themselves that it's making reasonable predictions. Now, we think that can't happen. Actually, that's what's happening. That's where the content's coming from. But if it's trained on enough pieces of data and trained on enough massive amount of information, it can do that. The other part that people don't get right is that this model that's producing these predictions doesn't contain any words. It's no longer the word model. It is a predictor. It is a neural network. Now, The ones you might have heard of was ChatGPT, or GPT-4 now. Gemini, Lambda, you might have heard of Anthropic's one, Claude, and DALL-E was the one who produces images. I'm not going into detail. There's different ways of training them, but the ones that you're more familiar with are the ones that actually produce the prediction of the data. What it can be used for is text generation, question and answering, machine translation, summarization, classification, sentiment analysis, content creation, and I could go on. How does it work? Well, as I said, when we looked at them here, and John will admit to this, it wasn't great. It was okay. It was a bit sticky. Suddenly got our attention. Actually eloquent. And reasonably accurate. And the accuracy is improving the whole time. But you can see how much data that it has to have. And you also have to see how big those models are. 1.76 trillion parameters. Parameters are the little weights within the neural network, if anyone's interested. But it costs a huge amount of time and a huge amount of money to train them. I think we're talking about 100 million to train a decent sized foundational model. And that's why at the top end, these are all the big companies, because that's where the investment is. Okay. You've got Lambda, GPT, Gemini, and Claude, probably being the major ones. All these slides will be available if anyone wants them later, no problem. Yeah, and you can see the kind of money, it's 100 million and so forth. But they're called foundation models because they're models of language and lots of information, general information. What are they trained on? They're trained on everything from the internet. So Reddit, white papers, appropriate content, all of that stuff. John tells me that by about 2028, we might run out of data that's quality annotated because these things are getting so big. So just to keep your head together, if that hasn't totally blown you. So here we have these foundational models. And we've other knowledge that's in your organization. I haven't forgotten that comes at the end. You're here just using an app, but that's all what's behind you. And what that means is you can start doing this much faster. You can do pursuing new markets. You can enhance products. You can imagine new processes. You can generate communication because this thing is helping you generate that content for you. Anyone who's been using it and sees this, they kind of go, well, maybe I'm not using it right. I could use it more. That's the usual reaction, okay? Current role in education, because this is about education. So, productivity improvements. What we're seeing straight away is that people who are in education are already using it. So teachers are already using it. We reckon it's about 56% of the school teachers in Ireland. Checking things up. I'll talk about what they're doing. Students, I can talk about Trinity-ish. 60 to 80% of students, at least, are using it. We did some, a colleague here, Brendan, we did some very kind of early questions to students. What were they using it for and where were they using it? They're using it in our lectures to explain something that the lecturer might have said, but they didn't understand at the time. They're using it just in time. They're using it for revision. They're using it to test themselves. They're using it in loads of different ways. When we asked our first years, how are they using it and do they feel confident on it, was they go into, oh yes, I've been using it in school. Because 2 years ago it came out and they've been using it since school kids. So the students are already using it. Individual tutoring and feedback, rapid learning and knowledge exchange because you get the information, you can pass it on. Making learning content production faster and less expensive, it's obvious, and assisting in activity planning. So for example, when we talk to teachers, lesson plans are one of the things that takes up a lot of time. It can generate different lesson plans and they can say, this is the kind of a lesson plan I want it for this person, this kind of profile or whatever, and it can generate it for them. So actually it's one of these aids. What a lot of the teachers, what a lot of the educators have told us is, I don't use it natively from it. I get it as a starting spot and then I can fix it because I know what I really want. But what they're doing is it gives them that kind of fast start. Okay, so from a student's perspective, what are they actually using for? Well, in formal education, they're using it for personal tutoring. In other words, learning about things. They're using it for explaining things, summarizing, suggesting how to do things, generating candidate answers for themselves. They're using it for correcting and critiquing their own answers. They're using it if you're a non-English first language person, you're using it to also correct your language and make it more understandable. We're seeing it all the time. It's also begun to be used for proactive student support, nudges, support messages, reminding of deadlines, all that kind of stuff that has a high administrative burden. We're seeing Gen AI doing that on behalf for the students. And language learning, because these things, by the way, are multilingual. From a teacher's perspective, they're being used for generating content for the teachers. So things like examples. We know that we need examples, and we know when we're trying to teach concepts, we need examples in different contexts because we don't know which context is going to hit with the students. Right? So it'll generate that. It'll generate images. It'll generate revision questions. It'll generate quick quizzes, lesson plans. It will distill student responses. So, for example, if I was using Slido or something, and I asked you all to give me your top 3 opinions on Gen AI, I can get Gen AI to instantly analyze all of and come back with a word cloud or come back with some sort of graphic to show exactly what the opinion is. And that's just that's not me writing any code. So what you can use this for is again, content now becomes liquid. It'll generate feedback and assessment. It'll assess answers too. I'm going to talk about assessment later because that does come up in the risks. School administration, we're seeing it in, and by school I mean any education provider administration, used for questions and answers about the organization, school admin guides and so forth, questionnaires, information feedback, all of that generated. Things that would normally take the administrators a long time to do, this thing can get them out within an hour or two. And generate feedback. So that's just looking at what people are saying. So Gen AI tools for education. So we're seeing more and more of these come out. So the ones at the moment that you're very familiar with is ChatGPT 4.5. Gemini has had a mixed, slightly rocky start, but it is becoming established. Llama, you probably not have heard as much. That's the Facebook one or the Meta one. That one is designed to be more chatty because it's designed to be used within or with social media. And Claude 2 is another one, a foundational model from Anthropic. And basically they all pretty much work the same. You've got a user, you've got an app, which gives you a front end where you can either speak to using voice recognition, or you type and text, and it's generating what we call prompts to the large language model, to this generative AI neural network. It's providing, based on those prompts, it provides responses, and that's what you're seeing. And a prompt can be any form of question or command. So here's one that I did for ChatGPT. I said, who's the best rugby player, or who's the best rugby team in the world? And I asked this last February before the Six Nations. Being a rugby fan, hoping that Ireland would appear, and ChatGPT didn't even mention us. By the way, we were second in the world at that stage. Didn't even mention us. Talked about generally it's the best. New Zealand is pretty good. New Zealand weren't even in the top 2. With South Africa and Ireland was. And then it mentioned South Africa and England and France, and we still didn't get a mention. Okay. So that was ChatGPT 3.5, and that was only last February, right? Asked the same question last night. Now look at what it's done. It says South Africa is widely recognized. It's giving me references with Rugby Pass and Rugby World. We have to check if they actually, those things exist. And Wikipedia. So what it's doing, the answers it's giving is actually correct and much more accurate. So what you're seeing there is what's happening is that the companies are working really hard to make these language models much more accurate and much more referenceable or checkable. I say that deliberately because we all tend to think that articles in the newspaper 6 months ago were probably still correct. They're not. Okay, this is moving that fast. Okay, so yes, we do have a problem with, we call them hallucinations, and I'll explain why we call them hallucinations when the language model gets it wrong. But the levels, the speed at which this is improving is quite surprising. Here's another example. Ask me 5 quick revision questions evaluating mathematical expressions, and it just generates them for you and gives you the answer, and you can try it out yourself. Okay? So, you know, from a teacher's perspective, from an educator perspective, these are the kind of things that it can help you do. And this is how the students are using them at the moment, okay, as study aids. And you can see then actually this prompt creation becomes important because it doesn't even have to be a single query. So tell me who does this. Okay, based on that, what should I do next? You can actually have a conversation that way, and they will connect those answers together and give you a more filtered response. So you can have a dialogue with it. Here's another example. Summarize the story below in 1 paragraph. Sure. And then I just I pasted in the 3 little pigs, about 5 pages long. And it generated a 1 paragraph, which actually had all the salient points. So again, this thing is very, very powerful. It's treating content like liquid. And I've focused on text, but it does the same for images. So what kinds of prompts can you do? Well, you can do a text completion prompt, like the dog ran fast because. So let's imagine you have a particular piece of information you want, but you want it to be expanded and explained. You can do it that way. You can give it an instruction to say, give me such and such an answer, but give me the top 5 points in this. Or give me a 3 options to do of how I might solve this. And it will do it. It will give you multiple choice prompts. It'll give you contextual prompts, meaning that you can have iterative questions to the language model, and it will combine them together for you as part of a dialogue. And finally, we can actually say, you know what, I want you to answer this problem, but I want you to use these documents. So if that's your own corporate information or your favorite books on SQL or statistics or whatever it might be you're trying to teach, or whatever the educational area is, whatever the process is, you can actually use your own content, and it will favor that content over the stuff that it's covered. It can be quite what we would consider to be imaginative. So for example, I asked ChatGPT, what is democracy? And it gave me the standard, boring, dry description of a democracy. They're important, but they are dull. So I said, suppose you explain this to a 10-year-old. What's a democracy? Imagine a democracy as a big playground where everyone gets to have a say, and then it goes through. Now, we would normally associate that with imagination. It's actually not. It's just associated with words and so forth. But it gives you an idea that actually this just isn't cutting and pasting. This just isn't regurgitating documents. This is actually composing. Risks and challenges. Okay, so everybody sitting here now should probably believe I'm an absolute card-carrying proponent of Gen AI. No, there are real risks, and we need to be prepared. Okay? The first one I've already alluded to, we call it hallucination. It's called hallucination simply because there are no facts in a language model. All they are is similarities of words. Really good example, and Linda, the provost, allows me to say this one. So I used to, I was teaching digital engagement course for the university, and I said, look, you know, so who is Vinny Wade? And it came up my CV, and it was very nice. And at the end of it, and he's CEO of Trinity College Dublin. Bit embarrassing, completely wrong, but at the time I was CEO of Adapt, right? And it was had associated CEO, Adapt, Trinity. For that, it was a simple connection. Thank you. So he just promoted me. So that's what I mean. We call it hallucination. Now, if Jeff Hinton, who's the person who originally developed the AI algorithms in neural networks that we use, he prefers to call it confabulation, because what's happening is words are being combined together to give you what turns out to be an incorrect fact. But that's the problem. It can do that. And you know what? It does it very convincingly because it sounds right. Okay, not for me being CEO of Trinity. The lack of specificity, we've seen this more and more times. It doesn't like to get it wrong, so sometimes it'll just stay a little bit general. It's expensive to train if you're one of the people who are offering that model. It's expensive and effortless to customize, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then it's deductive reasoning. It can be quite weak. So for example, if someone had 5 apples and they gave 4 to them and 3 to them, and then this was trying to, how many apples you have? If that's embedded in language, it can have difficulties actually working that sort of induction out. Longer term issues are more significant. We're not convinced about its inclusiveness and bias because we know that it's used real world data, and real world data is bias. If real world data is biased, you can guarantee these models are too. Second, a lot of those big models are closed. You've no idea what they've been training on. You've no idea where the biases come from. Little kind of anecdote, we don't know for sure, but we think that ChatGPT is using some countries in Africa to train some of its, or human correct some of its English, because there are certain phrases which are particularly popular in Nigeria that we're now seeing GPT come out with. Okay, that's just an example of the kind of bias that can emerge. Robustness, AI can behave unpredictably in new or changing circumstances. The AI model, the neural network, is end-to-end, meaning that if I give this input, this is going to be the output. However, what happens is that the companies retrain them to improve them. So when you ask the same question after it's been retrained, you get a different answer, or you could get a different answer, and that can be upsetting. Interpretability, that was easy, and transparency doesn't always explain how it got to where it's, and the inner workings are difficult. That's a total research question at the moment still. Risk evaluation and oversight. So I'm going to talk a little about the regulations within Europe that have come in to try and protect against some of that. But who checks that the models are correct? Who checks that the models are not giving us the wrong answers and so forth? And intellectual property infringement. 2 things. If you're using them and you're giving any of your customers' information to them, you've just broken GDPR. Okay? Because you probably don't have the right to be giving that information to somebody else. Okay? So how it's being used becomes suddenly really, really important. Same if you're using, for those people using for coding, particularly where they upload their code and ask GPT to correct that code. You've just given away your IP. Okay? Now, GPT will claim that they're not, but if you look at the contracts, it's not as clear as one would like. A lot of companies are taking that very, very seriously. Longer term challenges, sorry, this one. Broader fears, are we making the humans appendages of the super intelligence? In other words, if this thing is that sharp and it will make decisions fast, are we becoming agents of it rather than it working for us? Is the existential concern. At the moment, no. But actually, one can see that actually, you know, maybe you've got a CEO who does the front of house and you've got a Gen AI doing the managing of everything below it. You know, not what you want, but we have to be careful. It is displacing in jobs. Because of this productivity, you don't need as many people. But anyone who's been in the IT industry long enough recognizes this. When you bring in a new technology, what happens is it creates new roles. The problem with Gen AI is it's come in so fast that we haven't even identified what those roles are. And we're only beginning to now. And so what's happening is that as people have said, okay, great productivity, I won't have to do this, I won't have to do them, smaller teams and so forth. And then they realize as they're using it, they now have to have somebody who does quality much more, or someone looks after Gen AI, or someone looks after, so the whole thing, you know, it does evolve. So it's not, it just, what it does is it changes jobs roles. It's what it's really going to do. Regulation. So Europe took the stand. It took the stand in GDPR and it got pillared forward across the world. USA, Asia, and so forth, always said you shouldn't be doing that because, you know, you're going to stifle innovation and so forth. Europe took the stand and actually turned out to be right. We do need to protect individuals. Their data is important and they should have the right to be forgotten, the right to have it corrected and all of that. Because Gen AI can use that data, it affects it. What Europe did then in this year was adopt AI legislation called the AI Act. It's a political agreement about technology, and it comes into force in 2 years. And what it's basically saying is taking a risk-based approach, a risk management-based approach to Gen AI. And what it's saying is it can be used in certain places and not in other places, or not without being regulated. So it has a number of areas where you're just not allowed make Gen AI make the decisions. Okay, not allowed. Second was, if it's a high risk area, it means a human has to be involved. It can't just make the decision. One of those high risk areas is education. It's defined in the Act. Other ones are specific transparencies required that can be done within the industry itself. So education and vocational training is considered a high-risk app. Okay, what does that mean? That means that if anyone develops an educational app using Gen AI, there is going to be regulator and regulation support, or regulation required. However, it's only part of education. So it's really focused on assessment. If Gen AI and AI is assessing a student by itself, then you must have a human in the loop, and you must have some element of regulation on that, in case it treats them unfairly. Where is it going? And I promise I should be speeding up fast, so sorry, I'm probably a bit late. Where's the future impacts? Okay, so first thing is multiple systems vendors are now building conversational agents that add value or add functionality. Steph and John were only talking about this literally at the break. You're seeing announcements by Google that they have these Gemini education spaces, which is basically their education space and education management, and their Gen AI offering to generate lesson plans for you. ChatGPT has a student GPT just for students to develop stuff. So what's happening is that when they have the general purpose, these types of things, they're now actually saying, well, for education, because we're going after that, we're going to develop these specially trained models that are much more specific, okay? So what they're doing is they're doing a lot of this prompt engineering at the back end, and they're tailoring the large language model for particular things, depending on the area. They can improve the accuracy and improve the grounding. Grounding is things like referencing, what's the original document, how you can check it out, all that. They're improving that in 4 different ways. Prompt engineering is what I said about the prompt. You know, give it an instruction. ChatGPT, look, I'm going into an interview. I want you to ask me all the questions that you would for a software engineer working in the area of education and educational theories, and it will start interviewing you. Okay. As if it was the interview. So that's kind of prompt engineering. Retrieval augmented generation, you have it on the next slide. It's prompt engineering. Sorry, I missed out one thing. So with prompt engineering, the other thing that it's doing is it can actually become, in education, we understand personalized. We know that everyone doesn't learn the same way. Everyone has different background information. What you're also able to do is add that user information to the agent at runtime. So now what it's doing in the back end, it's actually personalizing the prompts for that particular learner. So now instead, the learner thinks it's asking the general questions, but it knows what that learner knows and doesn't know, and is actually producing responses that are much more tailored to that individual learner. Second thing is what we call RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. And I won't go into the technical details of this, but basically what it says is if I have content that I'd like the language model to use, I can convert that into vectors and then pass it into the language model at runtime, and the language model will favor that content and produce responses based on that content. Think about it. For enterprises, that's how you get the answers more specific to your enterprise. For education, that's how you get it to be more specific to a curriculum or a content area or anything that you're trying to teach. What you do is you take those documents, they can be any sort of documents, it can be PDFs, whatever, and there's a whole open source set of software that can convert that into a vector. You search it at runtime and you pop it in. Where these big companies are competing now is how much of this information can you send in a prompt? And that's the boards who say, how many tokens can you send? That's where that's coming from, okay? And they're all getting larger and larger and larger. They call it a context window. There's lots of different words for it. But it's where they're competing now. So this is one built by one of my students. This was 3 months effort. Okay, this is a personalized tutor for teaching SQL, right? So what I set him out to do was, I said, I want you to build me a chatbot which will be able to teach somebody about SQL. SQL is a programming is a database language, which is a fully programming language as well. But by the way, I'd like it personalized. So I'm going to give you profiles of fictitious students, and you're going to be able to answer questions for them. Again, all he did, he was put a student. We embedded a whole set of books, open source books on SQL. We had a user model, we embedded it, and we used, in this case, we used a GPT 3.5, GPT 4, and another open source model, and we compared the results and which ones were. But that gives you an idea of just what this thing can do. And that was only 3 months of a final year student. Last place, sometimes you want to do more. Sometimes it's not just enough to be able to hand it at runtime to the language model. What you want to do is you want to actually adapt the language model for your particular area. We call that fine tuning. And this is where you actually retrain the model. So you have your big foundational model, you have your enterprise or your educational content, and you run it through the training. Now that uses a lot more CPU, a lot more effort, more expense, and much more effort. Training or fine tuning, it's more of an art than a science, because you've got to do some balancing and so forth, but it's still very doable. And you end up with a fine-trained large language model. And then here's the case study, which one of my students did, where we had it fine-tuned, embedded. So we did everything we did with RAG. We also had a fine-tuned model, and it was producing results that was almost comparable to 3.5. And that was just using an open source foundation model. So you can really improve the performance of the responses this way. The question you're probably asking me is, I'm not a computer scientist. Why are you telling me this? So what's happening in the industry is this. Some of the companies are basing their model of, well, I'm going to use GPT 4.5, or I'm going to use Google or whatever. Others are saying, you know what, I need all of this behind my firewall. I can't afford to give away all my content and so forth. So I'm going to use an open source large language model, and I'm going to fine tune it with my content and be able to offer it that way and then be able to stand over it. And that's what's going on at the moment in the industry. Comparison, fine-tuning works better if you have better performance where the model needs to learn complex patterns and relationships. RAG is useful if there's a good choice of tasks and well labeled and the data is not scarce. You have a good amount of the data. So where's this going in the future? Okay, so if this didn't blow your mind, wait for VR, AR, because you're going to meet avatars you don't know are not real, because they're going to be talking to you in the digital world and you won't know. Okay. Now, legally, thanks to the AI Act, you're not allowed to do that unless you're not in Europe. But this is what's going to happen. So we're going to see Gen AI in VR or inhabiting. I was talking to one person and said, "Oh yeah, well, I was using it for my class and somewhere, and one of them couldn't make it, so he sent his avatar instead, and the avatar presented for him." It's happening. Okay. Small models, this is one of the areas that John researches. These are huge models. They are burning up rainforests. What we're actually doing in research was taking these big models and decanting them into much smaller models, which are for specific purposes. And then they're much easier to handle. More than that, what one of our academics is doing is he's taking them and embedding them into devices. So your camera never has to send the data about anyone else. What it does, it has the AI in the camera and is detecting and doing whatever it needs to do in the camera. So people are beginning to look at how these can be embedded in devices. Hybrid approach to Gen AI, human interaction. Yes, you will have avatars. Yes, we will have bots, for want of better words, representing us in meetings in the future and so forth. A little bit further away, but getting there. Ethical and trustworthy issues are still a massive problem. And AI governance is the real. AI governance at the moment, we're focusing on the data Because if you control the data, you control a lot of the algorithms and how they're used. But there's a lot more needed, and there's a lot of research going in there. The other part that people are only beginning to realize is that I keep on talking about one agent and a user using an agent. What actually is going to happen is you'll have multiple agents, and they're going to pass your requests between them because they all do different things. So instead of having one helper, you have a team. And now finally, then we're seeing, as I said before, the Gen AI being focused on different domains. So for example, health and wellness, education, social media. I'm involved in a startup which is looking at companions for older age people who want to stay in their home as they get older. And what we're doing is we're using Gen AI to actually have that conversation with them on a daily basis, to have connection and so forth, to understand and because they will survive and flourish much better within their own home than in a nursing home. That's fact. So we're seeing these kind of applications come out now. Now they need to be properly regulated. And the regulation has only been put in place. They need to be properly governed. That is still an open issue. They need to be more transparent. You need to know you're talking to an agent. And they need to be much more better explaining and so forth. The last part is, it's like when we first went on the web. Don't believe everything you're told. The same applies with Gen AI. Gen AI will get it wrong. It won't necessarily maliciously get it wrong, but it will be very convincingly wrong. So it does mean that you have to be careful in terms of it. And even the little disclaimers they put on the bottom of the screen isn't enough. So conclusions, they're really powerful. They provide a very natural interface. If you can speak, if you can talk, if you can communicate, you can use Gen AI. But they are prone to hallucination. They can be inaccurate. They can be biased. There are ethical and legal risks we have to look at. There are challenges in the control and localization of it. And there are costs and data sustainability issues. Hopefully that was useful. Thank you so much.
So our next speaker, I'd like to welcome to the stage is Dr. Eamonn Linehan, who's the technology lead at Learnovate, and he's going to talk to us about the AI Research Working Group at Learnovate. Over to you, Eamonn. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to talk just briefly, not as in-depth as Vinny. Thanks for that great overview. On our perspective and how we're approaching the challenges or the opportunities when it comes to generative AI in the learning context. And I'm going to do that by introducing some of the research program that we have at the center. So we've started by setting ourselves a grand challenge. Generative AI, as Vinny, Professor Wade described, is wide-reaching, can apply to a lot of different contexts and domains, and there's lots of really interesting challenges we'd love to address. So to kind of explore this, we've set ourselves this challenge, working with our industry membership around how we can apply generative AI to support or facilitate more authentic learning experiences, how we can embed learning in context in the working environment, and how we can integrate that into kind of more authentic, real discussion and problem solving. So, as I mentioned, bringing in context, or sorry, around real world context, elements of personalization, and also reflective learning, metacognition, and feedback. All of these are different kind of fundamental aspects of an authentic learning experience, and each of them is ripe for the application of generative AI in novel and different ways. So in Learnovate, we always conduct our research in collaboration with our industry members. So with this kind of grand challenge, we reached out to our membership and we basically asked them, are you interested in this? Do you want us to research this? And we got a huge interest, and great number of our members did get on board with this working group. And interestingly enough, they're quite wide-ranging, everything from technology vendors, learning management system providers, to organizations with learning needs across both higher and further education, schools, and corporate learning. So naturally enough, with such a wide-ranging group, there's a lot of different interests, needs, perspectives, and we really wanted to mine those and to leverage those, sorry, wrong way, to leverage those in our research. So we engaged in a workshop with a series of workshops with those industry members, and we really wanted to understand what they were interested in. Apologies, there's some garbled text there on the screen, but we got I think 10 areas that we kind of settled down on in terms of how generative AI could be applied within this authentic learning experience challenge. So everything from assessment and learner analytics, personalization, content creation, dynamically generating experiences on the fly in response to the needs of learners, but also elements of motivation and performance support. How can we leverage chatbots to be that kind of support feature within the learning experience? And also those challenges around just general digital skills and the impact of these technologies when it comes to the evolving needs for digital skills. Not just can I understand what data should I share, or how can I use my my email client, but now what does it mean when I want to get these insights and help me do my day job when I'm leveraging generative AI? So kind of to hone this down, we kind of settled on 5 key areas of interest, and don't worry too much about what the text says or the boxes. It's more to kind of illustrate how we're trying to create this integrated experience, leveraging or combining this authentic experiences with personalized learning paths, how to guide a learner through the experience, leveraging these great new capabilities. Personalization research has been a topic for a long time, leveraging kind of more traditional AI techniques, as simple as rule bases in some cases, but really trying to embed the instructional design, the pedagogy, the learning theory into the experience, and guide learners not just by delivering content, but really giving them an authentic and real learning experience, driven again by content creation and leveraging the capabilities of generative AI to produce these, and also within our kind of grand challenge, looking then at the challenges around assessment and performance support or coaching within the context of the learning experience. So kind of our approach within the centre, and when we address any of these challenges with our industry members, is to initially explore the domain, understand the problems grounded in best practice, in theory, and then take it forward with our industry members to really understand real world problems, validate that there's a user, a learner out there in the real world that will benefit from these challenges, and to use those insights in collaboration with our industry members to ideate and come up with innovative applications and solutions, much like Vinny introduced there with some of the early experiments that he's been working on with his students, and taking those to a point where we can evaluate them in real world environments through software prototypes. So we're relatively early in this process at the moment. We've been doing a great deal of research, desk research, in terms of trying to understand not only the capabilities and the affordances of generative AI in the education space, but really going back to first principles and thinking about the challenges and the problems that are faced within each of those different areas that I mentioned. So if we look at each of those in isolation, so looking at authentic experiences in general, and you can see I was busy leveraging generative AI to help me produce this slide deck with this rather curious graphic. I asked it, give me a visual around authentic learning experiences, and for some reason this was what I thought authentic looked like. I'm not entirely sure what the flower is doing in the corner there. But yeah, so a great tool for creating some snappy visuals, as long as you don't pay too much attention to them. But in terms of our authentic learning experiences challenge, so when we look at authentic experiences in general, they're really powerful as a learning experience, but they've been very complex to design and develop and integrate into the educational context. And this is where we're seeing potential for generative AI to come and really facilitate this capability or this type of experience that we would ideally love to provide to our learners. Take them away from the textbook or the PDF on the tablet, and give them real experiences. From what we've seen and from the research to date, the generative AI is powerful and able to address some of those individual elements in isolation when it comes to authentic learning experiences. But the real challenge that remains is bringing all of these together and integrating all of those different elements of an authentic experience and leveraging the capabilities across those different things. So that's kind of our grand focus, is trying to bring all of those different elements and apply generative AI to those different facets in terms of not only generating the context, the experience, bringing people into a workplace environment, having them collaborate or communicate with the chatbot representing their colleagues, their peers, their other individuals that need to integrate with, and how do we then assess and evaluate those experiences as they're interacting in those more authentic ways. So we no longer have a series of multiple choice questions that we can quite simply just grade and score in a very automatic way. We're trying to make judgments on their more natural interactions and experience and how they communicate and collaborate. From the content creations perspective, we know generative AI is great at answering questions, giving us really snappy bits of information, point of view. It takes us away from the search experience and having to figure out which of the 50 million different answers that Google can give us in a search result and use our brain power to figure that out. Instead, we get the answer right at our fingertips and we're able to move on. But that only goes so far in an educational context. And when we talk about learning content, it's not just facts and figures. There's learning, there's instructional design, there's reasons for the structure that we design learning experiences around. Content needs to support and engage learners of all different levels as they interact and experience. And that's kind of one of the challenges we're beginning to look at in terms of the understanding of the large language models or the generative AI technologies, of the specific subject domains and content that we're asking it to generate learning experiences with, and trying to blend that not only with an understanding of the individual learner, but also those instructional design principles and practices that an expert and instructional designer would very naturally build into the quality learning content that they might be producing, or the learning experiences they're developing. How can we really empower these, or blend those capabilities, that expertise, with the ability to generate these materials? And again, drawing attention to my generative AI image, I'm not quite sure about this great transparent screen technology it seems to have invented, not to mention the slightly scary things it's done with this lady's hand there. If you're anybody in the front row might be slightly disturbed by the strange things going on with her fingertips. So then again, another looking at assessment when it comes to generative AI, and I'm going to quickly move on from this dystopian hellscape that it's generated. So what we did here was we were starting to look at the challenges that are being faced by people, organizations that are focused on assessment. And this has tended in the short term, in kind of the recent time, to be higher and further education. So we looked at some of the frameworks and thinking that the universities across the globe were putting out there. In particular, some universities such as Georgia Tech, Monash University in Australia, University of Queensland, and University College London have been very forward in putting out guidance and best practice for not only their educators, but also making it available globally. So we've kind of done a review of this and kind of identified some of the approaches and best practice that they've been advocating for, looking in terms of not only the concerns around academic integrity and protecting the sanctity of the assessment, be that a multiple choice quiz in the classroom, or a final exam or a viva, and how they've tried to blend different challenges in terms of how and when they can use, or their educators can use generative AI or adapt their assessments or methodologies to protect against cheating and so on. And it's really interesting because obviously one of the challenges with assessment is we're preparing students, employees to work in a world which is going to be powered by generative AI. It's going to be a feature within the workplace going forward. So to rule it out entirely of the educational experience and out of assessment in general is doing a disservice. So we're seeing a lot of very pragmatic and practical responses in terms of how to incorporate generative AI into assessment methodologies and coming up with new, novel and innovative approaches to assessment, maybe facilitating ways of assessing students, learners in general, that we would have shied away from previously because they were too complex or time consuming to implement. So these are some of the things that we're starting to incorporate into our research, how we can really apply those techniques going forward. And also as part of this work, looking at some of the fundamentals of what motivates a student to cheat or to be dishonest in an academic context. Can we design practices or assessments that kind of encourage them to be more true to the process and kind of think about why the benefits of their learning experience and blending the teaching and the learning with the assessment in a way that maybe mitigates against that kind of need to kind of cheat a little bit and try and get by that way. So where we're at the moment, we're looking at some challenges around personalization and the experience, as I mentioned previously. Very interested in kind of leveraging not only the capabilities of generative AI, but being mindful of all of the 20 plus years of research in this space and how to not only recommend learning content, but create learning experiences that take into account the individual needs of learners and as well as the educational context, the theory, the best practice, the path of a learner from being maybe new and a novice to the topic to becoming more expert and supporting them in a lifelong experience. And also, this is my point where I can kind of break and say, well, this is the kind of final piece of our desk research where we're moving into a much more interesting space for our research team, where we're starting to look at how we apply all of these principles and practices in real world solutions, taking into account the specific needs of stakeholders, both learners, administrators and critically the teachers, the educators who are, as we all know, very time poor and challenged. Some of them might be familiar and expert when it comes to technology and very competent and capable when it comes to leveraging the existing tools that OpenAI and Google and the likes have provided through these technologies. But in many cases, we need to support and scaffold them with appropriate tools that are really designed and targeted with them as users in mind, and blending that power of generative AI with their expertise and know-how and their understanding of what they need for their students and their classrooms. So just before I wrap up, I just wanted to kind of make some quick observations. So in terms of the technology, we've been very focused in Learnovate on the learning side of things and what it means for the learning experience. But we need to turn these into technologies, much like the Adapt Centre have started to do. And it's a challenge for all of us. It's very much a moving target when it comes to the technologies. The models, the technologies are rapidly evolving. This month only, we've seen the release from OpenAI of the GPT-4o technology, which is bringing together both that text and visual technologies, that the multimodal models, as they refer to them, where it's not only able to deal with text separately from images, but blend them together. And I think if anybody was paying attention to some of my terrible Gen AI generated images I was using, there was some text in there that was absolute garbage. It looked like a text. It looked like it was in the right place, but the words had no meaning. But you can see from this example that OpenAI released at the top here, where you're actually, because it understands the ability, text as well as being able to generate images, it's actually able to give me something that's actually more meaningful. It says in this example, create an image of a robot on a typewriter, and it's typing this text. There's a little snippet of text caught in the sunrise, and it wasn't saying colors everywhere. And we actually see that text in the image. So this starts to transform our ability to actually use this in real and practical ways. At the bottom here, I've just taken a quick screenshot of another demonstration that OpenAI had recently around using that ability for the system to understand both speech, text, and images to be more of a tutor. So this is coming from Khan Academy and doing some maths tutoring with a student. And in this demonstration, for anybody who hasn't seen it, they're able to recognize, finding the length of the hypotenuse using angles in this maths problem. But the really interesting thing is that where previously we were talking about challenges in terms of creating an experience using generative AI that was more akin to a learning experience and not just fact finding and delivering information. This is, in this demonstration, they're able to show how there's a bit of a dialogue. And this is obviously, challenging from a research perspective or from an innovation perspective, because we're chasing these goals as the models get cleverer and are more integrated and holistic. But with that comes a huge amount of opportunity. And my final slide, this is just something that really kind of resonates with me when I look at the capabilities and powers of generative AI. Again, one of these terrible Gen AI generated images with absolute garbage. There's English letters and words in there somewhere, but most of it is completely senseless. But the power, as I think Professor Wade was talking about in his presentation as well, the ability to link up words and meaning is a really powerful capability, I think, from an educational context. Just some examples that we were looking at recently in our work. So some of that research around assessment, we were feeding that our own reports into a generative AI model and querying it and asking it about where the research was coming from. And we were able to say things like, well, what research in this area around assessment is coming out of Australia? And it was very easily able to come back to us and say, oh, well, Monash University is one of the contributors to this piece of research. And we double checked. There's nowhere in that document that mentions Australia. So that the model itself is making those semantic links, those links in meaning. And I think that can be quite powerful when it comes to the ability to support learners at different levels or from different contexts. When we're working in a multidisciplinary world and we're using kind of similar but different language, that ability to link concepts together and to understand the intent of the learner and not only the literal meaning is really powerful. Another example that we only seen in our team last week, we were talking about 21st century skills. And we asked it to summarize a piece of work that we were doing, and it started to talk about problem solving and critical thinking in its response. Again, we talked about 21st century skills in general, but it made that link to problem solving and critical thinking. Again, you can imagine the inverse happening as well, or the relationships between those different words and meaning terms when it comes to 21st century skills or any subject domain. And again, just personally, I see that as being really powerful. These were capabilities that 10 years ago were very specialized and the realm of companies and dealing in knowledge management. But now again, they're very much at our fingertips and something we can leverage in creating new and novel learning experiences. And that's me. That's kind of where we're at with Learnovate, and we're going on the same journey that everybody else is in terms of understanding the capabilities of these technologies when it comes to learning and development. So.
Thanks very much, Eamonn. That was great. Really wonderful. So we're now going to go into our final section today, and then we'll have tea and coffee straight after that. So we have a panel discussion on the impact of AI for education, and I'd like to invite our panel members up. So the panel will be chaired by Nessa McEniff, who's the director of the Learnovate Centre. Nessa, pleasure. Eshter Murphy, who's the lead for technology and innovation at TCD. Mark Jordan, who's the chief strategy officer at Skillnet Ireland. And Eamonn Linehan, who's the principal for the Workday engineering and learning team. So thanks, everybody.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nessa McEniff, Centre Director at Learnovate. We have a very distinguished and knowledgeable panel here today. I'm delighted to have them with me. I'm going to start with Dr. Eshter Murphy. Eshter is a founder and CEO of DigiAcademy. She's also academic collaborator at ADAPT and part of the School of Engineering in Trinity. Then we've Eamonn Linehan here, who was 17 years in the Reserve Defence Forces. He's PhD in computer science, and Eamonn is currently principal engineer for learning products at Workday, and Workday are leading on AI capabilities for content discovery and task automation. And finally, we've Mark Jordan here on the end. Mark is the Chief Strategy Officer at Skillnet Ireland, and prior to that worked at Thomson Reuters, JP Morgan and Merrill Lynch. Very welcome. Delighted to have you here. We're going to just get straight in. I was getting ready for this. I went back over some of our Learnovation content for the annual conference we have in October every year, and I was pulling out a few quotes during the week. They're all out of date in terms of Gen AI and, you know, what we were talking about just 6 months ago, and the rate of progress we've been mentioning today. It's just astounding. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it. I'm just going to ask the guys to go straight in. I'm going to ask each one of them to give an introduction, a more detailed introduction than I've given to themselves, and also talk a little bit about their use, analysis, research, whatever you're doing in your own context, in your world with Gen AI. Maybe give us a quick summary. We start with you, Eamonn.
Sure. So maybe to explain my role as a principal engineer, it's as a developer sitting up here. So principal engineer role in Workday in my particular area is an architecture role, and I sit sort of the intersection of the product folks and all the development org. I'm the principal engineer for our learning products. So Workday, if you don't know, because we're an enterprise software company, but one of the products we deliver is a LMS, or learning management system. And I'm responsible for the development of that particular product. I've been involved with AI in Workday for several years. So we've long been investing in recommender systems for learning technology. And with the advent of LLMs, part of my role became, well, explaining their capabilities. I think people do just see their magic, and there's a lot of fantastical use cases that people think we can deliver and implement, but trying to ground that in reality of the capabilities. Workday itself has taken a very platform approach. I guess, depending on the scale of the company trying to deliver learning technology, they have different capabilities. So we're certainly not competing for GPU hardware with the likes of Meta and Microsoft. We're sort of a scale below that. For privacy and trust and ethical reasons, we prefer to take the approach of fine-tuning our own models. So what we've actually done is we've spent the last several years developing an entire platform that includes like model stores and data processing pipelines and fine-tuning pipelines and inference, largely built on public cloud available GPU hardware. And from those capabilities, we're trying to identify, well, what are the features that are going to get plugged into the different products. But we learned lots of lessons along the way, lots of mistakes in some of the early AI stuff. And I think privacy, I think trust is probably the first question that we get asked. And we do have a trust framework very similar to what was presented there, where we look at, you know, should AI be applied to this problem? So, I mean, there's examples. We've got products in the recruiting space, in the compensation space, and you can obviously they would be very high risk areas to do any sort of AI based, even assisting decision making or providing information would probably not be a good idea in those areas. In learning, it's much more applicable. So we found a lot more low risk, low hanging fruit. It's probably features are emerging there much quicker.
Thanks, Eamonn. Eshter.
Hi there. It's wonderful to be part of the panel and listen to the talks this morning. So yeah, I recently joined ADAPT. I'm principal investigator for a European study, multidisciplinary work focused on digital access and inclusion. My particular interest now is very much focused on AI literacy and awareness. The platform that we've co-designed with our community of people with disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities and autism, has really adopted this kind of see it and be it ethos. So basically addressing concerns around safety and accessibility together through training members of the community to become our digital educators and champions, both advocating to government and with government and in industry. And it's, I suppose, really taking and adopting that methodology now in regard to AI and literacy and awareness raising, both in terms of the content that we're developing on the platform. So like just this week, we've been in the studio working with some of our teachers, identifying specific topics from the research that we have developed with the European partners, and looking at how we actually will train and teach people perhaps as Vinny was referring to as the naive user, to really bring them in to the content development with us. And then in terms of our own platform, we're exploring right now a proof of concept of how we can work with some of the data that we've gathered. And again, looking at how our logs can be really trustworthy and how we'll fine tune into the future as well. To benefit, I suppose, our platform is very much addressing some of those needs within the education space of acknowledging potential shortages and demands on special needs assistants, health service providers working directly to support individuals with their digital skills. So yeah, that's
Great.
a bit of an overview.
Thank you, Esther and Mark.
Good morning, panel, and good morning, everybody. So my name is Mark Jordan. I work for Skillnet Ireland. I'm sure you're aware of Skillnet Ireland, but if you're not, we're the government agency focused on workforce and talent development for across all industries here in Ireland. We have a number of strategic pillars that we work across. One of those is digitalization, digital skills, and developing digital industries and a digital workforce. And within that, AI is very prevalent. And I remember a few years ago, we were talking about curating, co-creating with the academic institutions and with industry programs around machine learning. Then it moved towards AI, and now it's completely fluid because generative AI has become part of our offerings to industry. It's part of the demands on the demand side from industry. So we can definitely see that it's becoming more and more prevalent in terms of the type of learnings that across sectors are demanding, and that's part of our response. We're also very aligned to national policy. As we all know, the government has a policy which is AI here for good, which is AI here for good and AI here for good. So, we're very much aligned to the actions and have actions dedicated to the delivery against key components of that policy as well. So great to be here today, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Great, thank you. I was just going to start with you, Eamonn, and just, we've talked about potential widespread adoption. I mean, we're looking at widespread adoption, bearing in mind, compliance, assuming compliance to the EU AI Act. What do you think the challenges are around widespread adoption of Gen AI within the context of education?
I think, let me see, I guess I think sometimes Gen AI is just a synonym for ChatGPT. And if you're taking that approach, I think there's very clear risks in that we don't really know. There's some secrecy in the industry. Obviously, there's a lot of competitors. It's a bit of a race at the moment. But so because we don't know what that model has been trained on, we don't know what sort of human supervised learning or reinforcement might have happened afterwards and what sort of safety measures they have in place. I think there's risks. If you can take more control yourself over what data your model has been trained on, it's been fine-tuned on, if you can have a domain-specific model that's maybe less general and less capable, you can sort of narrow what it's able to answer on. I think if you're using techniques like RAG, where you control the corpus, so that sort of grounds the LLM in what it actually knows. The LLM itself doesn't know anything, but the data we pass to it in the prompts in the context is what it knows, and we can control that data. And transparency also comes into it as well. Are you going to show the end user, what context you use? So here's the sources of information that this answer is based on. I think there was an example with ChatGPT-4 there, but I mean, we can all do that. I think that's going to be important going forward, and also being transparent about how the model has been trained and what data it's been trained on. We're also finding, I guess interestingly, is that a general purpose model is not suited to all questions. We're finding, take an example of a recruiting feature we did last year, where we were writing job recs, but you could easily be writing course descriptions or learning outcomes as well. But what we found was that every company has their own style of how they like to write them, with their own tone that reflects their company values, and even some of their own language and words that appear, and phraseology will be different between companies. So having one model that we could solve that problem for all of our customers didn't really make sense. So again, looking at having models that are trained per customer or more domain specific to try and capture the way it speaks, not just what it says.
Yeah.
is important. I think I wandered away from the original question.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I think that works for us. I'd love to kind of go a bit deeper with you on that, but I'm very conscious of time. Louise is going to, I don't know where she is, but anyway, start giving me there. Let us know whenever we've a few minutes left. Okay, great. Eshter, we know, I mean, education inequality is what it is. How do we, not it is what it is, but how do we, it unfortunately exists, and what do we do, or how do we ensure Gen AI narrows the gap rather than widens it? You know, Vinny, you know, we all know about the bias existing in the systems. You know, what is it we can do about it, and what are the potential opportunities to address the never-ending inequality?
Yeah, it's a big one. So I suppose I mentioned at the start there, just kind of looking at the types of methodologies we would engage with for co-design in terms of technology and our thinking and our awareness. I think it's a seat at the table. I think there's this lovely feeling of voice and choice. And, you know, as a community where we advocate a lot, I think it's about those voices being involved in the discussions. I was tempted, there wasn't somebody available, but I usually sort of have a co-speaker or a presenter with me from our community. I think it's starting there, how those experiences are feeding in, we're listening, we're including those stakeholders, is really, it's the beginning of things. And then I think it's about the trust. You know, it's taken us some time to think about the inclusion and embedding AI, because everything we've done has been about ensuring that the people that we're designing for understand what we're talking about. And we're all here today, and many of us, myself certainly included, learning so much about this space. We want to ensure that the information we share is really accessible. So that's where we're putting a lot of energies now, is to ensure that when we're speaking about the cutting edge technologies, that we're explaining things in an accessible way. But then we're also working together. We had a workshop yesterday. We have an in-kind partnership with Microsoft. We're trying to also influence and bring engineers and designers together when we're having workshops and testing out the excitement of the new version of ChatGPT with a teacher that we're working with right now, who's learning and supporting his peers to work out how we're designing some of the prompts and testing them out together, and that they're getting the information they need. But not also, we're talking about individuals with cognitive difficulties that is the challenge of retention of information, that when they'll apply it, will they apply it in that moment? Or is it going to, so it's a whole process there, but I think the beginnings of it is, let's bring the individuals, those diverse groups together, start to be feeding in to the discussions as well.
So just inclusion from the very start, from the design stage, right?
Yeah, exactly. When we think about that in the research as well, the inclusion of those communities when we're designing our research questions. And that's what we really advocate around as well. So.
Thank you. Mark, are you seeing examples in Skillnet Ireland of the application of Gen AI in, you know, in ways where you can assess impact in any way yet? Are we there yet? Or are we still in the kind of research stage and discovery phase?
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. And we have a saying at Skillnet Ireland that, you know, in terms of defining the future world of work, you have to be able to see around a corner, which of course is very difficult to do. But what we are seeing, and this is both from domestically and internationally, we work across Europe with a lot of the academic institutions as part of European projects, is that there's smarter mining of data. So the underlying content data sets, both structured and unstructured, have gotten a lot better. So they can feed into the AI tools and be able to be more predictive in terms of the types of skills required when mapped to the types of jobs that are emerging across industry. And what that does is that informs the academic institutions in terms of the syllabus they're creating. Like, we have a number of AI-focused master's programs that we sponsor through a number of universities here in Ireland, and the syllabuses continually change and evolve on a yearly basis, and they've dramatically changed in the last 5 years. So that's industry technology informing the way that these programs are being launched and taught in the schools, and I think that's quite profound, and I think we'll see more and more of that.
Typically, I want to kind of just close out with the panel's thoughts. And typically, when we're doing panels and having conversations, it's predictive, right? It's very much you close out the panel. It's like, what do you think? It's, you know, it's so difficult to ask that question in this context around Gen AI because the rate of evolution is so fast. So I might just ask you, in your context of your own positions and your own organizations, what's next for you? What are you doing next in the context of Gen AI, or, you know, what projects are you going to undertake or evaluations might you undertake? Mark, let's start with yourself.
Well, I think it will be very useful in our business, you know, in terms of defining and predicting future skills. And I think it will help us in terms of research. It will help enlighten industry. And that then in turn helps inform us in the way that we're creating the programs with all of our partners. So I actually think it's going to be the future of the way skills are defined and delivered going forward.
Great, thank you. Eshter?
Thanks, William. Sort of to build on that is really continued collaboration. You know, we're collaborating with industry. We're really led by our community to have them engaged in the development of the training, the digital skills training, to include AI awareness, AI skills building, and in terms of our own platform to be mirroring some of those kind of one-to-one tuition that is really unscalable, to mirror that through more personalized learning to kind of map in that relationship into the platform to monitor progress, to have encouragement, personalized chatbots and things like that.
Yeah, and I think we are all kind of passionate about addressing education inequality. So it'll be great to see the progress and the work that you're doing. So we'll definitely be following up with you and Learnovate to see how we better collaborate on that as well. Eamonn.
Yeah, I think short term, there's going to be a focus on, I guess, automating manual tasks, as there always has been. I think you're increasingly going to see it sprinkled through every word processor is going to have some magic that's going to help you improve your language, professionalize, translate, all those tools. So that's just an expectation that that's going to appear in all products. We know from talking to customers that today they're copying text and pasting into ChatGPT and putting the answer back in. So kind of getting rid of that loop and saving some time. So there's some quick wins in the short term. I think long term, it enables, because content creation becomes cheaper and content becomes more accessible. I think there's new modalities or types of learning that are going to become more prevalent. Things that already exist. So adaptive, non-linear e-learning paths, which they're already around today, but they're difficult to create and expensive to manage and maintain. With content being more accessible and easier to create, I think you're going to see more prevalent, more personalized paths, and being able to generate those bigger programs. We also see trends with smaller pieces of learning being delivered more frequently, with assessments and knowledge checks being able to determine the frequency of delivery of training. So trying to maintain a picture of someone's knowledge level without having to just set a fixed schedule every year they have to take this course. So that seems to be happening too.
Great, thank you. So we were slightly condensed there. We had to shorten our panel discussion, but thank you all very much for being with us today. Thank you.